Welcome back, Wanderer, to another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. In the realm of game design, where creativity meets strategy, one name shines brightly: Alexander Brazie. A luminary figure in the industry, Brazie's journey is as legendary as the worlds he's helped create. From the hallowed halls of Blizzard Entertainment, where he left his thumbprint on titles like World of Warcraft, to his pioneering work at Riot Games, Brazie has been a guiding force in shaping immersive gaming experiences. But Alex's legacy extends far beyond the pixels and polygons of virtual worlds. As the founder of GameDesignSkills.com, he's on a quest to share his game design knowledge and empower aspiring developers to navigate the waters of game development using the wisdom he's gleaned from his years of industry experience. So join us as we unravel the secrets behind player-centric game design and explore the intricate dance between creators and players that defines the essence of gaming. Alex, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, super excited. I appreciate our friend Ryan connecting us.
Yeah, what a guy. What a guy.
Yeah, we actually just wrote an article on how to be a DM for the first time for my site. And now it's really exciting to stumble into this conversation. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for taking the time. So today we're sitting down to talk about player-centric game development, and not specific to any one type of platform or type of game, because you have kind of got your toes and your fingers into just about everything. So feel free
Just
to throw
at this point.
But before we dig into the topic of the day, I'd like to just get a little bit of a grounding, a little bit of your origin story. How did you start out? How did you fall in love with games and writing and design and development? And how did you get from there to here with all the bumps along the way in a short version?
Man, in the short version. Well, it's all my brother's fault, and that's all there is to say about it. My brother and I were playing a game way, way back. I think I was 6 and he was 4. It was called Bubble Bobble on the NES. And we finally beat this game. You had to play these tedious levels of hopping up and down over and over and over again. And we finally beat the boss. You had to beat the boss twice. And we beat the boss the second time, which in co-op was quite a challenge, right? Because the other character's always dying. He jumped up and down, yelling and screaming. We were so excited, like, it's the best ever. And then I saw these credits roll and all these Japanese names coming down the screen. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess you have to be Japanese to do this, but I want to make everyone feel this good someday. And then a few years passed and I was 12, 13. And I sent an email to a company called Cyberjour in France. And I said, hey, I'd like to, here's some assets I made for your little game. It's called Growl Online. And they contacted me and they're like, oh, great. Would you like to come and do this with us? We're starting a new project. I'm like, yeah. And like, how old are you? And I'm like, oh, shit. I was like, I am 24, sir, at the age of 14. And they're like, perfect. Yeah, after college, you got lots of free time, probably bored. Spent 3 years working on that project, and then it just collapsed due to overscoping. It was really all volunteers. And so that took me down for a little bit, but the taste of game development then was in my blood at that point. And so moving forward a few years, I became a programmer. I was studying computer science at RIT. And ended up working at Microsoft on Windows 7 of all things. But just despite having a good job, it was incredibly comfortable. I just wasn't really happy, right? I wasn't sitting there and being like, man, this is what I want to be doing every day. And I caught a flight down to Orange County. A friend of mine I'd met playing World of Warcraft in Alpha invited me to hang out at his house for a weekend. And I was out there. And during that time, one of my mentors, Tom Cadwell, said, hey, why don't you have lunch with some of my friends? Did, and that ended up leading to me becoming a game designer on World of Warcraft. I'd done some modding and tweaks, and they liked my work. And so I spent 6 years on World of Warcraft, designing raids, encounters, classes, PvP battle zones, questing, the Green Fire quest, everything. That led to me working on League of Legends, which then led to me getting bought up by Tencent, starting my own game studio, doing that for a couple of years until my partner passed away, and then decided to take a break and going back into AAA or III, I guess at that point, shipping Ori and the Will of the Wisps as a game designer.
Yeah.
And then working for 5 years on No Rest for the Wicked, which comes out, I think, a week and a day from the recording, which will probably be just after this podcast launches.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, I realized, people kept coming to me and asking me, Alex, how do you do this? How do you do this? How do you do these design things? I started blogging, and then people got interested, and they said, hey, will you teach us directly? And I started teaching people and mentoring and started a program that led to game design skills. And here we are. So, and now we're here living in the future.
That's one heck of a road, man. That's incredible.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is if you look at any individual thing, they all look like they all just, this didn't work and this didn't work and this didn't work. But, I feel better about being a game designer than I ever have before. I'm calmer, I'm more open to other people's feedback and interests. And I even go into company cultures and help them improve their culture and become more design focused, right? And make their games better as a side effect. And I realized that that's because of the mistakes, the failures, and being like, well, I survived that one. This next one surely can't be as hard. And even though it is harder, you get through it anyways,
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know, is there any other story other than just when you fall down, keep going? And I believe if there's anything to teach anyone in this industry or any industry, it's that, right? That just keep going, keep pushing, keep growing, and keep leveling yourself up. All right. That's the end of my rant there.
No, that's great advice. I love it. We're starting off strong here with I
Yeah, of
love it. Okay, well, let's dial into the topic of the day here.
course.
You've touched on the illustrious places you've worked, the big places you lived. Like, let's address the big
Yeah,
ones. World of
sure.
Warcraft at Blizzard. You worked at Riot.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you've learned from those experiences at the big places to start off that have shaped your game design
Mm,
approach, especially how it applies to
yeah.
player experience?
Oh man, that's a really good one. So I would say that Blizzard was kind of game design adolescence, right? Coming from this idea that I knew all these things and just needed the opportunity to actually executing is really, really hard. And the quality of work is kind of what you're delivering as an associate. And then the next level to get to mid and senior is actually interacting with the team and understanding the team dynamics and the costs of the actions you take, right? My friend Wyatt Cheng, who was a phenomenal, phenomenal designer on Diablo, used to say, Alex, there's three different levels of designer. Sure, there's many more a title, but there's really three. There's associate, right? And we hand you a squirt gun. You can fill it up as much as you want for free. You can fire it in the faces of everyone you want, and everyone's annoyed. But at the end of the day, you're not that dangerous. Then eventually you get to mid-level or senior. We hand you a 6-shooter. You're dangerous, but you only have 6 bullets. When you use those 6 bullets up, the team's done with you. We're done. And then you get to director. And directors, they have a sniper rifle. They can kill anything on the project they want to. But every single time they pull that trigger and fire that bullet at the team, everyone freezes. Everyone's scared, is my thing next? And it paralyzes the team, right? And
Mhm.
so as the director, you need to only fire that bullet when you absolutely need to save the project, right? And that's always stuck with me, right? That the responsibility of being a designer and making the right calls for the players and for the project is that delicate balance. Now, that I think was kind of the Blizzard days, right? Riot was one of reaching out and understanding a community, as well as internally one for me growing and becoming, working through a lot of my insecurities, right? When I joined Blizzard or Riot, when I joined Blizzard, I was nobody. No one had any expectations of me. When I joined Riot, everyone knew of me as this famous blogger from Blizzard who would be the first one to actually talk about what happened behind, the cathedral, the wall of silence that was Blizzard. And so people had these huge expectations for who I was and how I should behave and how I would carry myself and all the value I would bring. And I was overwhelmed, right? And constantly trying to live up to what that idea of that expectation was in my head. And that led to me stumbling and overreaching or trying to do too much or putting in too many hours where it wasn't necessary or even expected or pushing relationships too far to get 10% more out of a visual effect. And, that cost me a lot, I would say. And so for that, it was learning about restraint and kind of that beginning, that spark of social awareness within the organization. And then obviously, moving into my indie stuff is a whole different set of lessons.
Mhm.
But the most important stuff was not just about design, but about your role within the team. Right. I know that your question was about game
No,
design, but
no.
really the way you interact with a team is the most important thing you bring to any team. Right. In terms of game design, there's so many things I learned about, how to have a player first mindset at Riot or, how to balance many very conflicting points of feedback from highly biased sources in taking player feedback in World of Warcraft, right? Everyone's lobbying for their class, not lobbying for what's best for the game. And how do you sort through that, right? And I could go into technical details and all this stuff, but at the end of the day, it's about understanding that at the end, your job as a designer is to create an experience you want to create that is compelling and connects with the interests, desires, and motivations of the player base. And if you do those two things well, you feel satisfied in your craft and they feel satisfied in their experience.
That's brilliant. I love that.
Thank you.
You killed my first two questions with one answer. Wow, that's cool. Is there, to dive a little deeper into that,
Yeah.
is there a lesson? Like, obviously, you took that lesson from that experience. That applies, and you apply that to the work you do now. And I would assume probably you apply it to your whole life. You probably have a
Yes.
collaborative mindset in everything you do now based on those experiences.
Yeah. When you can only be, so you have to choose, right? You can be a solo mad scientist for so long. And to be fair, I'm always chaotic in my explorations of new ideas. But if you want to go fast, you can do it alone. If you want to go far, you need to work with others.
That's a great saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to twist this a little bit and dig a little deeper,
Do
because
it.
this is what I do.
Yeah, I love it.
Specifically from a craft design in there up to the elbows, setting aside for a moment the necessary element of collaboration and teamwork.
Yeah.
Is there a lesson you learned that lives in the heart of Alex these days?
All right. So at Blizzard, I would say there was actually, so one of my mentors said something to me before I started at Blizzard that didn't click until I was there. And I've actually repeated this one a few times. And it's that there's 5 elements to understanding players, right? And it's, the understanding that they see things and they either understand or they don't understand. They evaluate them and they decide whether they care about it or not. They then, when they care about it, they have a set of responses. Do they act or they do not act? How do they respond? And then lastly, based upon how they acted, they either feel satisfied with acting, dissatisfied with not acting, or dissatisfied with acting and feeling that they'd be better off not doing anything. And then lastly, all of that kind of has this gestalt of, is it appropriate to what they came here to do within the game? And I would say developing that formula and that recognition of how to break down player experiences was the Blizzard era, right? And so for me, right, that was a big one. Another was understanding the nature of archetypes and the different, not just player archetypes, but play style archetypes and the different ways that players engage with the game. The way that a single college student engages with the game is different than the way a single father plays the game, with the way a 65-year-old grandfather plays the game, right? But if you understand the commonalities of humanity, you can make things that appeal broadly.
Right.
Riot, on their hand, was about how to make things appeal sharply. Every character in League of Legends is not for everyone. And that is something they said all the time. But if there isn't a character for everyone who does want to play this genre, then they messed up. So Riot focused on sharp experiences, whether it's, mad multicolored painters or long-range siege characters or close and stealthy assassins, right? It was about deeply getting into the mindset of the person playing this and then making all these crazy different experiences work within the same framework.
Good stuff. Love it. Just out of curiosity, which was your preference? Which?
I really loved Riot the best. There was something. Blizzard always felt like it was an old family with all the old family problems, right? You have the old uncle who has long outlived his helpfulness and just kind of like makes everyone uncomfortable at the yearly parties. Riot, on their hand, felt like, hey, we're all here, we're all struggling, we're all trying to get better, and we're all making this game better, right? I still stay in touch with a lot of my Riot colleagues. And that said, the depth of connection was deeper at Blizzard because you spent literally, so many hours with these people. Some of them still reach out and check in the way that Riot colleagues didn't, right? Riot was a sports team. Blizzard was, the nagging family that saw you as an awkward teenager and never let you forget it, right?
Nice.
So
I'm just curious, just because it popped into my head and because I love it so much. What did you think of Arcane?
Oh, I've loved Arcane. Actually, I have a fun little story about Arcane. So I was working on my game. So after Riot, I went and started my own studio. I'm like, I might just go do this myself, right? I'll make some little idea. And Papa Tencent and bought us all out. So we had a little lump of cash. And I was working with a guy named Alex Yee. He was actually the writer on the game I was working on. And so he was doing the writing and all of the narrative world building as I was building the gameplay. It was a cooperative, sort of like Dark Souls side scroller before I'd worked on Ori. And we had this idea of, this young woman who had basically dedicated everything in her life to career and risen to the highest echelons and been fully acknowledged by the world. And then she stopped and had to ask, what's next, right? And that was when the world fell apart, right? The world that she had built herself to be perfectly suited toward fallen apart, and now had to figure out how to exist within this post-apocalyptic world. Anyways, and we were, we had like a really strong idea of who all the other characters were and how the world was developing. And then he got the call and he pulls me aside. He's like, Alex, I have to go back to Riot. I'm like, oh, okay. They need you for some random recording. He's like, no, but I have to go back and do this. I thought they would never approve this project, and they did.
Mm.
And he did. And Arcane exists, and the world is a better place for it, and is the first proof in my eyes that video game adaptations can be made as deep and rich as narrative ones in other mediums.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I loved it. I loved Arcane, and Alex and his writing team are absolutely phenomenal people.
It was I tell anybody I talk to, it was a masterpiece. It's top 3 anything I've ever seen, period. Like every frame is perfectly done. Like the characters are from every point of view, from sound, music, framing, lighting, animation, storytelling, the whole thing is perfect. So, but that's me.
Yeah. Originally that was supposed to be about misfortune. Originally, that was the original thrust. And then that story, they just didn't have enough characters to interact with that were likable, because misfortune versus Gangplank was just wasn't. That was the first swing I think they took back right after the Jinx music video. I think that was the plan, where they were going to do misfortune, and it just didn't quite hit, I believe.
Well, I'm glad they went the way they went, because Jinx's story is,
so touching. Like, and what a compelling character too, right? Just like Yasar is this just mad, insane character, and then you care so much about Powder, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. Oh yeah, that's a different podcast, different episode.
Not much gameplay in Arcane. I will say that. That's the only thing missing.
Okay, well, let's dig back into the topic here. Your dedication to putting the player's experience first is evident in your work, your advocacy, what you do inside of games, and what you're doing with your other efforts.
Thank you.
So I'm curious, what are some of the key principles or strategies that you employ to ensure that a game resonates with players in a way that's like deep and meaningful?
Yeah, so that one's probably one of the bigger struggles for me. And it comes from the fact that I think it's pretty well known by anyone who's interacted with me that I'm neurodivergent, right? I'm not full on autistic, but I'm also not fully holistic. And so I live suspended in between these two worlds, right? Of these people who are, very literal and, very implicit, right, in their communication styles.
Mm-hmm.
And while it means that most of the time I feel like an outsider in a lot of social interactions, it also means that I can see these perspectives of analysis, experience, and also this emotional tapestry, right, that is crafted so brilliantly within games. And having that mixture of technical insight on how to execute and then kind of these emotional goals that you're in pursuit of is kind of that weird tension you need to craft meaningful player experiences, right? So I'm going to use a concrete example of how I approach this from World of Warcraft. This is the Warlock rework. For those of you familiar with it, maybe read my blog, it's on the website, etc. But when I approached this, there was this wonderful guy named Sinwise, and he's like, here's the technical problem with the class. This had happened. This is overloaded. I went to Chris Kalecki, not my favorite designer, but at the time he was owning Warlocks, and I was like, hey, what's going on? He's like, I'm spent. I don't have good ideas. Everything I want to do is just adding more layers on top of this, and I want to focus on Monk. And so I went to Greg, and I'm like, Greg, can I just take over Warlock and try something crazy with it? I mean, it's the lowest played class in the game, even next to Rogues, right? And it has dropped off sharply in the last 2 expansions. What harm can I do? And he's like, if Kalecki's okay with it, go for it. And I was like, okay, so I understood the technical problem. Too many things that were stacked up into too many chores, too many physical chores for a normal person to enjoy. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, but there's another problem here, and I can feel it, but I can't put my finger on it. And so I reached out to Shinafel, Rachel Ustrebi, who was one of the top Warlock players in the world. And I'm like, hey, would you put together a group of the best Warlock players in an email, and just I want to basically ask them some questions. So she facilitated this. And then I was like, hey, I need to understand not only at the competitive level, but at the lowest level, what is going on and why people are struggling with this class. And so they gave me a ton of technical details, and there was all this stuff about this talent is too strong. And then once I took away all of the technical mathy noise that all those pro players loved, there was a consistent resonating theme. All of them feel the same. Nothing feels special and unique. And I'm like, that is an emotional connection issue that is being expressed in a gameplay problem. And so then the very next thing I did is I went to the weakest players on the team. There was a guy named Eli Cannon. And I went to him like, hey, you used to play a fire warlock. How do you feel about that? He's like, I don't really feel that fiery. And it's just, I do all of the things and I have to have this pet and I don't really have choice in this. And then I went to one of the original creators of Warlock and I was like, hey, was the, it was like, modality was really important. The fact that my choice of pet, Warlock, Succubus, Big Ding was very distinct and mattered. And the class talent design had driven away from that. It said, you need to all go in this path if you're in this spec, this path if you're this spec. And I'm like, oh, we have undermined people's agency. We have undermined people's choices. We have undermined the emotional resonance with the very character you are spending maybe a year of your life with. And I'm like, cool, let's throw everything out. At which point the entire class design team did that. They're like, but to be fair, I had been there about 3 or 4 years at this point. They were used to hearing me say the crazy things like, okay, this will go away in a week. And then I actually said, okay, what is the absolute heart and soul of each of these? And so for the Affliction Warlock, I'm like, I think the story's good there, right? I went to Travis Day, who rest in peace. And I'm like, Affliction Warlocks, they feel on point. He's like, yeah, these things need to be fixed. They're like, great. Then I'm like, Demonology Warlock. He's like, yeah, they feel like Affliction Warlocks. And Destruction Warlocks, they feel like ugly Affliction Warlocks. I'm like, okay, great. Validated. Great. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's take the biggest fantasy possible. Let's start with the Fire Warlocks. And this is all about the apocalypse. This is about ending the world with massive bursts of power. And I said, let's take that and push it more extreme because Warlocks are extreme player characters. And I'm like, I want the slowest, longest cast time spell in the game that hits for the biggest number that we can legally allow in the game engine, right? That is still is balanced in PvP. Everything else is a slave to that. I want big, few moments and simple gameplay. And then working through, I said, okay, that's my goalpost for this one. For Demonology, that one was kind of a mess. I was like, we need something different. I actually went Tank Warlock, which, they, didn't make it to live, but got validated and, the classic rework. And they actually put that in. And the guy who shot down the original Tank Warlock came to be like, by the way, I put it back in because you were right. I'm like, yes. I met him at GDC this year. He's like, by the way, I'm like, oh, validation 17 years later. Anyways, and so that one didn't work out, but beat it all about pets and tanking. I love this stuff and transformation. That's what Demonology became about, transformation. And then I said, okay, what is the next element, right? I've got the vision post here. I was talking to these warlocks for feedback regularly. I told them about this crazy idea, and they're like, there's no way you can balance that correctly in a year. I'm like, I don't know. And secret, by the way, is balance is not as important as you think in a single player game or even a multiplayer single player cooperative game. It's just not as important, right? You just need to get the ballpark within 10%, which is doable with almost any spell combination in existence. So I said, okay, so if that's the case, what is the next problem after the emotional problem? It was the physical execution problem. Okay. Now, Chris Zierhut, the guy who actually killed the Tank Warlock, he had the right answer right away. He's like, there are too many things going on. Sin-wise, same thing. There are too many things going on. So I ripped out everything I possibly could, played the game with every core spell removed and said, what of these spells actually is meaningful? A lot of these aren't meaningful. Throw a lot of those extras out. And then what of those core was absolutely vital? So I kept, Curse of Agony, Corruption, and one other, and drain spells for Affliction. For the nuking class, I'd made it fire. Your shadow spells, we're actually going to remove them from your bar. Corruption turns into Immolate. Shadow Bolt turns into Incinerate, right? We're just going to take those away from you. You don't need them on your bar. They're never the right choice. And people are like, why? I'm like, because it doesn't add to have these buttons sitting around and achieve the game. We'd given up on spell damage, right? Shadow, fire never mattered anymore. We gave up on that after Blackrock back from there. Okay, anyways, let me speed this along. I built a bunch of these abilities. So I said, what is the fewest set of abilities I can do that makes a core rotation? And the answer was 4. Immolate, Conflagrate, Incinerate, Chaos Bolt. That's it. That's all I needed was 4 bolts. And it felt really good. And then I was like, what is the next problem? And it was physical interactions of pressing the button over and over again. I'm like, how do I fix that? And that one was hard. Anyways, let's speed this along a little bit. And I just took these problems one at a time and said, how do I make the player feel, engaged by fantasy? How do I reduce the physical strain on their body? How do I increase the number of decisions and choices, right? Do I heal myself? Do I nuke or do I AoE in a very big, visible way that other people around me appreciate and I feel powerful? And that was it. Everything else was gravy. And so I say that is kind of what builds that core. Is like, what does the player need? How do I attend to their physical needs, their decision making needs, and then everything else, just let it be gravy. And it sounds simple, but it really is not much harder than that. It's just about detailed execution within that vision.
Brilliant. And there's collaboration along the way in your story there, so that's also obviously an important part.
Oh no, I did it all alone. Did you not
Yeah.
hear? I definitely was not hospitalized at
Brilliant.
some point. And two of the people I just was making fun of in that talk saved the day and like pulled it out of the fire while I was hospitalized for a month, right?
Oh,
Teams are so important. And I was getting feedback from both the internal teams who were like, you're really redoing everything. And then they're like, you actually did it in a weekend. Okay. We need to support the shit out of this to get it the rest of the way. And we got UI elements and all these features supported. And the programmers pulled a couple weekends out. Omar Gonzalez, I've never forgotten you, right? To make this stuff come to life. And we're super excited and it's so supportive. And I worked with these people for years. They're like, you don't go hard unless you are really into it. We're backing this 100%. And it blew the players away.
nice. I hear when I talk to game devs, I hear the concept of the story stack and respecting player fantasy and figuring out what the player fantasy is. This is a
Yeah.
textbook case of somebody who's really smart and knows what they're doing, figuring out what that player fantasy is, and then working backwards to make sure everything is serving that fantasy. So that's brilliant.
I hadn't even heard of the story stack at that point. So when I eventually heard it, I'm like, oh my God, that was it. I figured out the fantasy, right? The next step is the actions the players performed, then the game economy, the meta resources that allowed them to make sharp decisions,
Mhm.
and then the specific individuals of what the abilities are and what the expressions, the actual moment gameplay of the story itself was.
Really good.
But that wasn't a well-known term. But it was the right way of doing it. Because so many people, they hear fantasy and they immediately jump to story. What
Mhm.
am I doing? But no, it's about what kind of experience are you having,
Yeah, love it.
right?
You mentioned clicks per second or the physical interaction. I'm just curious because it
Yeah,
popped off in my head. I used to play StarCraft way back in the day, and that
yeah.
game's the other way. They want more clicks per second. How many physical actions can you do? That's why I was never good at it. But
Actually, that was the failure point of StarCraft 2. David Kim and Matt Cooper, who I still talk to Matt Cooper occasionally. He's over at Meta now working on Horizons.
nice.
And one of the things we talked about was that the mistake of StarCraft 2 was expecting too much out of the core players. So for single player, it was okay because they tuned it down really low. But for competitive, you needed to be able to cast all of those spells as Protoss. Whereas Protoss used to be take these big units and let them auto attack each other, and maybe you micro a High Templar, right?
Hmm.
And it pushed the competitive scene so far out of reach for the normal player that it created the environment that made Dota and League of Legends successes by making gameplay that competitive players played at, but a single player could imagine that they achieved that level of success.
Action economy. It's a big deal in tabletop as well as
Incredibly.
video games.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on. Let's talk for a few minutes here about GameDesignSkills.com. You've mentioned it already.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
sure.
as the founder of that, you've made it kind of your mission to share insights in your experience, your wisdom with other people, aspiring game developers. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, how do you believe a player-centric approach to game development
Mm.
can benefit these developers and players as well?
Yeah. So I think that the most important element to a player centric approach is understanding that the vision of your game means nothing until it makes contact with real player experiences, right? And that's why what I teach. I have 3 courses coming up. One about philosophy, which is first principles of game design, that teaches you what you actually need to know, right, in terms of like how to get inside another player's mind, how to think iteratively, right, how to transform my idea into steps to validating your idea. And that's why we go through basically the sensory stack. Do they understand? Do they care? Do they have a response? Is that response satisfying? And does it fit? Right.
Mhm.
And that's because that is literally the way every human sensory experience works. But so often the difficulties of executing, the complexities of building a team or organization tear people away from that. And that it feels like, well, I had one idea and I just need to execute on it. When in truth, you just need to get the minimum amount of work to get to the next stage over and over and over again. Put it in front of people, see how they respond to it, and then adapt and grow and change, right? Um, And that's really what a player first mindset is. It's believing that you don't have the answers and you cannot have all the answers, but the answers do exist. And there's a whole bunch of options that will get you there. And then the role of design and leadership is to pick the options that work best for your organization, team, and talent, right? I'm not the right person to make dark web streamer. Chantal Ryan is, right? She understands the creepy verse, right? And the underweb, so to speak, that finds that world appealing, right? If someone comes to me and says, let's make an RTS, let's make, an RPG with, elemental combinations and multiplayer and mixed Stardew Valley. I know I'm a hit for that because I've already built the sort of experience before. But, it comes down to understanding what are the things that are essential to that player set and what are the things you can throw away, right? The cloners, right? The ones who just go through and let's make Fortnite again, don't know what to throw away. They would have kept build mode. They wouldn't have said, hey, let's just roll back these features that actually aren't serving the core player base. And so, right. That's what's so important is that you need to get yourself out of the way of your own success over and over and over again, while still empowering and motivating yourself to keep pushing for better and better things. An example of this I love to give is Zareth from League of Legends. What is it? Colt Hallam, yes, reached out to me and asked me, hey, we're about to do a Shurima event. Can you rework this character before the launch? I'm like, yeah, I'd love to. And I went through and I had a whole bunch of things. Let's get rid of this clunky siege mode that never really worked and so on, right? Anyways, actually, it's funny. He just texted me right now. Hi, Gold. I hope you see this podcast someday. He's one of the best leaders I've met at Riot.
Very cool.
Anyways, and I went through and made a bunch of big changes to it. But there was one thing I was really stuck on. It was this powerful passive that let you penetrate through magical resistance. And I was so stuck on that. I'm like, this is so powerful. It makes an equalizer so this character still works even if there's tanks in the game. And this is kind of their niche. They're not just AoEing the softies, but they're cracking the tanks too. So everyone doesn't want him to stay alive long. Well, Daniel Xenon Klein, right, had to take over the project for me as I was brought into Freya, which is a now defunct project at Riot. And, they had me go in and do R&D and basically build some other type of game. And, the other lead and I sat down and said, this specific thing is very, very important. He's like, and then threw it away as soon as we were out of the room. And it was the right call, right? And I forgot how we got to this, but it was because he understood that was something that would never be important to players, right? That even though it was important to us in design to ensure this character had a niche, if we had built gameplay good enough, and we didn't need it anymore because the gameplay carried player experience, So.
Listening to you talk about this, it sounds like a player-centric approach and really getting into that mind space. It's like this dance between human psychology and then understanding mechanics and balancing and gameplay and game space.
Yeah.
I'm curious how much to become a really good developer, a really good designer. How much human psychology do you need to study? Like, is it something you need to take classes in, or do you just need to read books, or just pay attention to people in the world? Like,
that's a tricky one. So I had the difficult fortune of having a mother who wanted to be a therapist and didn't quite make it there, but we had books on therapy, psychology, and being neurodivergent and not always seeing all of the social cues, right, and feeling alone. I found myself pouring through those books, whether it's how to win friends and influence people, or choosing 101, or deep studies on psychology and all of this stuff in a desperate, deep craving hunger to understand human beings. And so for me, that I would say was a very important part on the path of game design, was that emerging my own fire with this desire to create and be appreciated and enjoyed by other human beings. But the simple truth that I've seen working with more and more people is that the biggest opposition to becoming a good game designer is ego. Right. And so many people come in and say, well, you can't make anything without ego. I agree. You need enough ego to take the ridiculous risk of making something new. But it needs to be tempered by self-restraint and the ability to turn it off so that you can take in the feedback from the world around you and iterate. Recently worked, at Moon Studios, and Mahler's biggest problem there, I'm just going to say it, he knows that, I've said it to his face, is that his ego is so big he doesn't take in the feedback around him, right? And that leads to problems. And I wouldn't have realized if I hadn't gone through that same problem myself, right? I had a period of time where I'd been so deflated in my own belief in myself. I overinflated it to basically take up the space to do these crazy things, become the mad scientist of, World of Warcraft. And then, went to Riot and met super talented people who were far younger than I was, and then had to watch that be deflated and then make a game of my own and then be deflated more as I realized how hard it was without all this architecture and support, right? Networks that had been built up over years by Cadwell and the teams over there. And then realizing, oh my goodness, I remember there was a turning point for me where I was in Vegas and my now business partner David introduced me to his friend Michael. We had lunch with him and David pokes Michael, like, Michael, do your thing. Michael's like, and he sat there and he just kind of read me. And I'm like, how do you know these things? Did David tell you? He's like, nope, we've never discussed you before today. Here's what I read about you. It was so spot on. You know about cold reading, right? You just say a bunch of generic things and people put themselves into it. This was almost the opposite, right? Where he was like giving specific signals and indicators and things like this. And I'm like, how did you do that? He's like, I did it by turning off my ego and just seeing what was in front of me and what you presented and what you said and showed about yourself. And this guy over the next year or so actually would meet with me, fly into Los Angeles and say, I've never had anyone ask me how to let go of their own ego before. Let's see if it's possible. And he worked with me on, deprogramming a lot of my belief structures that weren't helpful. And I don't want to go into all of this, right? He's got his own challenges in life, and eventually it eventually concluded when I realized the things he was teaching me were things he struggled with himself, right? And so, like, I was able to move past some of those myself because I realized, oh my God, all of this has been about Mike the whole time. But that's it. That's the problem of ego, is that gets you stuck in yourself instead of stuck for the players and for the people and the communities you're serving. And that enabled me to become actually effective as a consultant. I go in to serve the client, to serve the players. And you know what? If I get asked to walk away, that's okay. My job is here to achieve the outcomes of the owner and the player. And then I move on to the next project. And I do that over and over and over again. And I love it. It's exciting. It's engaging. It's intriguing. And then it keeps being like, thank you for bringing impact on us. Thank you for changing our culture, improving our process, right? And that's having the player first mindset, is being able to get what you need while serving others, right? Anyways, I'm sorry, going off in super deep philosophy territory, but it's what matters, right? Because when you truly love other people and you understand not only the people who love you back, but going to grow that love for people who are strangers you've never met, you can suddenly want to craft an experience that's beautiful, enjoyable, familiar, receptive, and above all, resonating with them and their life experiences. And that's the heart of player centrism.
I love it. I'm going to tell you a little secret. This podcast isn't actually about stories or games. It's about philosophy.
Yeah.
I ask those questions because when you get to the middle of where the two meet, there's usually something philosophical, usually something around community or empathy. And in this case, the setting aside of ego, which is a new one and very interesting. So thank you for that.
And I just want to say this for those people who go out there and are, beating up on themselves or like trying to think that ego is, making yourself smaller or less. No, not letting go to your ego is letting go of the need to be so important that you believe you're the problem. It's letting go of the need to be so right that you are the hero. It is letting go of needing to even be the villain to make sure it's letting go of that entire cycle of hero, victim, villain, right? And just getting the job done. So those out there, there's one other little one. You like philosophy, so I'll throw this one in there. The pendulum that can swing brightest also swings darkest, right? And ego, as it can be done for beneficial reasons, often can also go extremely dark and extremely selfish reasons. And it's about achieving that balance of both and recognizing what mode you're in allows you to make the right decision for the state of development you're in. Because there's a time when you need to say, I want this because I want it and it's important for my vision, and pursuing it. And that's what makes things stand out and unique and original and memorable. And there's time to say, and I will serve the needs of others to get what is best for the project. And you need to be able to let your pendulum swing both ways, not just one. No one can be the good guy. No one can always be the villain. You need to go back and forth.
Beautiful. We can almost end right there. Like that's the stuff I was looking for. That's what I wanted to know, but we're not going to. No.
All right, let's do it.
Not quite yet.
Yeah, I got more time. Let's do this.
Oh, excuse me. Just to bring it all together, because we are kind of coming to the end of the serious stuff here.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm looking for is if when you sit down with a new student, when you sit down with a developer or a designer who's struggling to find their way or just starting out on the path, somebody who comes to one of your classes perhaps or grabs you on the GDC on the floor, what would be the core piece of advice if there's something you could give to those people to help them along their way, there a light you could give them to light the darkness, what would that be?
That is such a difficult question. I recently worked with an incredibly inspiring USC student who um, took on a project that was a little bigger than she was ready to fulfill, right? It was trying hard, and was so torn, having been a lifetime overachiever, right? Very talented, incredibly empathetic, trying to do the right thing by the team, and was doing the wrong thing by themselves or for themselves, right? Ultimately burning out, psychologically wounding themselves and overextend their grades, right? And eventually made the right call to for them to step away. Um, and in that case, the thing I wanted to emphasize was that, hey, saying no at the time that isn't right doesn't mean that you've stepped away from that journey. In fact, that's moving to the right stage, the right phase, the right set of responsibilities for your ultimate growth, right? But that's one story. That's for the person who, believes that who went too far and believes that they're done, right? Or maybe not, that one's probably an over exaggeration. But the other story is the person who believes that there's no hope, there's no possibility, right? And for that person, they need to know, hey, okay, go ahead and fail. What do you mean? Well, you just decided you failed, right? Go fail again. You're going to be in the same place, right? You're going to be down here. You didn't accomplish anything. Go fail again.
Hmm.
Why would I do that? That seems like a waste of energy. Maybe you'll enjoy it. Go make a card game. Maybe it's a really shitty card. Take war and just write letters. Write on the cards. Write a deck of cards. That's like what, $7 investment, $5 deck of cards, $2 for a marker. Just scribble some stuff on it and go play it with a friend. Did you enjoy it? No, not really. Cool. Well, you're more of a designer than you were a day ago. Congratulations. How do you feel about that? It's interesting. Well, do it again. Do it a little better this time. But what's the point? I'm never going to get here. I don't. Did you enjoy getting from here to there? Well, who cares? Who cares? Don't worry about becoming Miyamoto. No one else gets to be Miyamoto, right? He was in the right place, the right time, and the right person, right?
Hmm.
Don't worry about that. Don't worry about the guy. Just be a little better than yourself, right? And then making the resistance to that staircase go down. That's the other story. So the people who are pushing themselves too far, let them take the brakes off and balancing their life, because at the end of the day, both of these are about re-achieving balance.
Hmm.
And I said that balance is like the least important thing when it comes to game design, right? And that's true when it comes to numbers. But when it comes to a mixture of creativity and technical capability, understanding players and understanding yourselves, right? That's the kind of balance that really matters, right? Is that being able to push things back and forth and get yourself centered. Not be self centered, but get yourself into a centered and stable place. There's everyone says know thyself, but it's okay if you don't know what you want to do, but you know just a little bit of the person you need to become, right? And that's it. Just get the smallest step. The smallest step you can take, and take that step. If you don't like it, you didn't really lose that much, right? And I think that goes for absolutely everything. Social interactions, it goes for learning technical skills, it goes for friendships, right? Just take the smallest step to see if someone wants to interact with you. Hey, cool hair. Thank you. Great. Maybe never interact with that person again, right? But you took the effort to connect with another human being and make their life just a tiny little bit better. And again, just small things, super small things. The world is built of small moments, not big ones, right?
Brilliant. That's it for the serious stuff. But
Cool. Let's do some
speaking of
silly
philosophy,
questions.
what's that?
Let's do
Sorry.
some silly stuff. Let's go.
Well, I speaking of philosophy, I have a question that I ask everybody. Kind of lives at
Mm,
the heart of this social experiment that I'm doing. I call a podcast, and it's a
okay.
little philosophical. So bear with me.
Let me pull out a drink. All right, let's go.
All right. So this question is, in my opinion, there's a magical space at the intersection of obviously story and game, but also improv, comedy, screenwriting, comic book writing, novelists, tabletop role playing, all of these things where people can come together. There's a shared language, there is an instant feeling of fellowship.
Mm.
If you agree with me, what is the magical thread that holds this space together?
What is the space between ludonarrative dissonance and human experience? That's a good one. I feel like I should have thought about this one a little bit more before I came on. But the story between story and game. Story is, for better or for worse, about the journey someone else has imagined for you. Game is about the journey that you have taken upon yourself, right? And it's that friction collision point that creates the sparks that makes things memorable. Um, and so I think that that intersection is actually friction. Okay, it's a little bit interesting, right?
Mhm.
And so I believe that it is friction that creates experiences that are memorable. This can be crafted experiences. This can be frustration with a story outcome, right? This can be something like spoilers for anyone who's watching Final Fantasy VII for the Runeberg, right? Why did that character die, right? She was so important to me, and being upset with it, right? And then having emotional investment in that character, that story, that arc can be that emotional investment in your character and the personal growth. It can be that all of those moments, they don't happen in the smooth things that are just going on. That doesn't mean the game needs to be rough. That doesn't mean the game needs to be janky, but it comes to having and wanting to push back against the universe. All right, we're going really philosophical here, but one of the things, I guess this actually is the second thing I would teach someone after, hey, bring yourself to balance, is you are a reality distortion field. You, the person in that camera right now. I can pick up this D20 or D8, and I have now forever modified the nature of the universe. Cool. Shockwaves just passed through the floors into sounds that will now have impact on the sun and stars and the universe around me. Just for an arbitrary moment where I decided to toss something. I don't even know what the number is. 6. Great. Right. And we have the power to distort the universe, either for our benefit or against our benefit or whatever. But at the end of the day, every single human being gets to change the world forever in a conscious, mute, irreversible way. Right. And so that is the point of friction between story and gameplay. Gameplay is where we get to make the impact. Story is where we don't. And that little, that's where we remember things, right?
Love
We
that.
push and transform the story right through our actions or our choices, where the story pushes on us and makes us change and grow.
That's a really good answer, man. I haven't heard it. That's the first time I've heard that. And you're the first person to roll a dice on the show.
Sorry about that.
No, no, you did 6 points of damage. Well done.
Yeah, and apparently a little dent in my floor. All right.
No, but seriously, that's a fantastic answer. The concept that it's the friction itself and what that generates is actually what lives at the dramatic heart of those two things. I love that. That's brilliant. That's going in the book. That's good.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it for the serious stuff. Now we can get silly.
Okay.
I like to wrap things up here with what I call the quick fire, obviously, because I come up with such original names.
Okay.
Just top of your mind, just getting to know you a little bit better. What are you currently playing?
I just finished Dragon's Dogma 2, experience which I have so many things I could say about it. Incredibly coarse game that did a couple of things that were really interesting and really proved out that, hey, you can craft an experience that people crave after showing them one that they expected. Very fascinating. If you get from Dragon's Dogma to Dragon's Dogma 2 mode, you'll know exactly the moment I'm talking about. I also have been, let me just pull up Steam here. I've also been playing Hard Space Shipbreaker, is someone I was working on. But the game I really want to give a little bit of airtime to is Caves of QUD. It's a roguelike game where you are in the United States after a horrible apocalypse. And now there are either cybernetic human beings attempting to survive in the world after some horrible event. I don't want to spoil the story has occurred, or you are mutants and you are basically put in this procedurally generated world, trying to figure out what is going on and rising to the occasion or overthrowing the world. Really great team. It's been in development for 11 years and is shipping, I think, in next few months.
Very cool.
But it's in early access, and everyone who loves story, and especially procedurally generated story, if you ever thought you wished Dwarf's Fortress was more interactive,
Mhm.
needs to go check this out. It's a masterpiece.
All right. I will be doing that later tonight. Thank you for that one. What are you reading right now?
Oh, I'm reading A Court of Thorns and Roses, as well as Fourth Wing. Most people who actually have known me for a while know that I am an absolute mongrel for romance novels. And every year, when my Audible credits are running near their timeout, I go to my Facebook group or Facebook page, and I'm like, all right, everyone, give me your ridiculous romance novel recommendations. I will. Originally, I did this as a joke. I'm like, all right, I know I've got some people in here. And then I did it. I'm like, oh, these are actually great stories. In fact, if you haven't listened to a pulpy romance novel, you really haven't realized how to get into the head of another human being, or the way that human beings experience life from like a very basic level, right? And there's just something about the approach to, and the tropes are obvious, but it's an enjoyable, pleasant ride as the characters are arguing and fighting, but there's really chemistry behind it, right? And I think also getting out of that niche of, I used to be all self-help books or hard fantasy stories, and just getting out and trying new things and being like, you know what, life doesn't have to be so hard and serious. Go ahead and go on a romantic adventure, right? Is a balance I think a lot of people in the games industry could use.
Very cool. I want to back up for 2 seconds to what are you playing? I'm also curious. Do you play tabletop role playing, board games, live action role play? Are you
Okay.
into any of those right
I'm
now?
currently DMing a campaign of my own crafting, but I just finished the previous campaign a little bit ago.
Hmm.
And this one I want to brag about if I have 60 seconds.
Oh yeah.
I ran a D&D campaign that started in the pandemic, and it involved two teams. One was a team of heroes, one was a team of villains. Neither knew the other team existed. Some people were just like, oh, we're playing evil characters and we're playing hero characters. And they were both placed in the same world. And so the actions of each team were transmitted to the other team through the events the other team was cleaning up and interacting with. And the villains, being villains, eventually, wore themselves out and obliterated each other, as well as, getting beaten by the heroes. But the heroes had no idea. And then there was down to one. This girl named Ariana Isbell, and she's like, I want to meet these heroes, thinking it was still a game,
Right.
and I want to blue do 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 do. I'm like, why don't you come over and do that? And so invited her to a. She's like, wait, what? I'm like, and so she joined as an NPC, an escort NPC that was just like, I am a sweet little toy maker. Please escort me to the other town because there's orcs and dangerous things in the way. And the party, which I've been very blessed that most of my dating groups have been majority female, and they just come to me like, Alex, we want someone who's not going to mansplain things to us, someone who will help us have a good time and let us make mistakes. They're like, Alex, run a game for us. I'm like, okay, great. And so I introduced her to that team, and the villain heroes and villains was a total mixed group, but this one, and they all were like, she is precious and we must protect her, right? This led to the next 2 years of that campaign. I kid, maybe it was like 18 months, something like that, where she stayed in character, kept leading them into traps, leading them into danger after danger after danger, literally going into like some of like warlords and robber barons and all these things, and like, oh yeah, this is my uncle's house, and her uncle was this slave master, and all of these things, right? And the party was like, okay, well, this is funny, right? This is just what's going on, and for the final session, she came to me. She's like, Alex, it's been 2 years. I love these people now. These are my friends. I can't keep deceiving them. And for all of we eventually transitioned from, online to in person. We actually hosted it right here at this table. And she had been showing up in all of these cherubic dresses and all these pretty girly gowns and all this. And she's like, Alex, I need to actually dress as who I am. So for the final session, she comes in dressed like this as usual. And then I give her the signal and she goes off to, bathroom over there and changes. And that was when they had been trying to track down who had kidnapped her character. They walk into the lair, gate slams shut. She turns, just like, you just couldn't leave me alone. I'm like, at this point, I stood up from the DM screen, handed the DM guide and all of the stuff to Ariana, who comes out in like full on goth attire. And the whole party is like, what is going on? I'm like, she'll be DMing the rest of this campaign. And then proceeded to just attempt to kick the living shit out of the entire party. And they have come to me many times and been like, this was the most memorable moment we've ever had in the campaign. She literally tricked us as real human beings for over a full year. There were lots of little, like little hints and moments and things like that. They're like, yeah, she's just a little shady. Everyone in the party is a little shady. And that was probably the best campaign I'll ever run.
That's brilliant. That is brilliant.
Ariana did all the hardest parts. I just facilitated. I was like, oh yeah, this is a thing. Great time. Yeah.
But you were careful to make sure that there was enough plants along the way so when the twist came, they could look back and go, "Oh yeah, that,"
Yeah.
and "Oh yeah, that's,"
She'd
yeah.
she'd even started a romance with one of the grumpy Goliath women in the group, who's played by Jennifer Newman, and she was like, Jennifer was the most suspicious of her the whole way through, but she's like, all right, well, she's acting this weird because she likes my character, so she's going out of her way to overprove how worthy she is to my Goliath, because Goliaths are all about displays of proof and all that.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing played out. And Jenny jumped up. She said, I knew it. I knew it. I knew there was something wrong with you. Or suspicious, shady about you. And the whole table just was riveted as she came out like full on. And then just obliterated them with puzzles and had a whole dungeon prepared. And yeah.
Dude, that is so fucking good. Seriously. All right. All right. We gotta be wrapping up here. So
let's do it.
Almost done here. If you could insert yourself into any video game as an NPC, what world would you go to and what role would you take on?
Having already been injected as an NPC a few times against my will, I really wouldn't.
There you
go. If I did, I would probably pick some sort of cozy, beachy game, right? Just something relaxing and like, hey, let me give advice to people and help them kind of like get through whatever challenge they're in. I really think that, yeah, I would do something like, Hello Kitty Island Adventures, right? Something simple and chill and just relaxing.
Nice. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, last one. This one's tricky. If you could host a game session with any 4 people, living or dead, from any time in history, who would it be and what would you play?
That is difficult. There's the weird mix, right? There's the impulse to like grab the people I've always wanted like to spend time with and be like, oh yeah, let's do that. And then there's a question of who are the people I've lost that I no longer have the opportunity to spend time with. And this is probably not the answer you're expecting, but I think actually in truth I'm at peace. I don't think there's anyone that I need to reach out to or any game that I need to play that would actually give me a sense of completion towards what I've done in the past or the present, the future. So I don't think there's an answer for me that works. The people I need to reach out in reality, I could still reach out to. And if I did want to spend quality time with them, I don't think I would want the structure of a game interfering with the direct connection. So I don't think I would want a game if I was to engage with the people I wanted to connect with.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a wrong answer.
Just wrong people.
There you go. All right. Well, my friend, that is all of the questions. I do like to make a little space here when we get close to the end. Is there anything you're working on or anything you've worked on that you want to promote or boost?
Okay, well, for people who want to go play games, No Rest for the Wicked's coming out. I spent 7 years on that. I wrote the original design document all the way to basically what you're playing now, minus a lot of polish. Kevin Jordan jumped in and took over my footsteps after I stepped away. Very happy with him. In terms of people who want to learn how to level up as game designers, GameDesignSkills.com. I am coming out with a 13-week game mechanics to gameplay design course. It is the best thing I've ever written, designed, the best thing I've ever created in terms of the educational products. It has been 2 years in the making. It involves 4 different game designers from Respawn and No Rest and other games like that coming together to teach everything from the 3 C's to the fundamentals of game mechanics to my personal expertise, which is compositional game design. And I really encourage anyone who wants to just learn to see games at a level of dissection and breakdown that you've never seen before to come check that out. And lastly, to everyone else who is just a person out there, I really want to say that there are a few things you can do for yourself better than self-reflection and growth, and taking a space to just even for a moment pause and appreciate who you are and what you've done to get here. And remember that everything you do going forward is you transforming the world into the world you want it to be. And so to ask yourself every day, is the actions you're taking right now getting you to become the kind of person you want to live with the rest of your life? If the answer is yes, keep going. And if it's not, go talk to some other people. Consider therapy. Go listen to Dr. K, right? That there are just so many talented, amazing free resources out there to help people grow, change, and adapt. And having just recently lost my friend Travis to self-harm, I would like to say that there is hope out there for even the most frustrated and despondent people in the world. And if you're feeling like, you're struggling, reach out to other people, give yourself one more chance. Sometimes that last step is what makes all the difference.
As I bid farewell to Alexander Brazie, I'm reminded that the heart of game design beats in harmony with players' desires. And through his unwavering dedication to prioritizing the player's experiences, Brazie has elevated the art of game design and enriched the lives of countless players worldwide. Alex, thank you for taking the time to sit down and share your hard-earned wisdom with all of us. And as always, to you, dear listener, thank you for taking your spot at the table. May you continue exploring, creating, and sharing your stories with the world. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the Corner of Story and Game.